just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down.
There you go. Good job. Yeah.
And laugh when he's conquered and won.
You're listening to Cofield and Company
on ESPN Las Vegas.
All right, time to go behind the patch. Another report from Raiders training camp. Adam Hill has been the guy on the road for Cofield and Company. It's Candy, it's Cofield, it's Ari. Adam, another Rams practice today. What was the biggest story that came out of the dual practice with the Rams and the Raiders?
Well, I'd like to say that there was a fight. Really, there was two fights, but one was just kind of a continuation of the first one. But I think the actual biggest story would be the potential injury to guard Gabe Jackson, who was carted off the field. We don't have any indication yet of the extent of the injury, but I know as we left the practice field, there was a lot of concern about that status. And listen, it's a position you don't want to have anybody get hurt, especially an established starter guy that can really play. But certainly anything else among the guards is very difficult to deal with right now. Denzel Good had back surgery. He's out. Richie Incognito suspended the first two games. This is certainly a thin position for them, and they were hoping the offensive line, and it's revamped, and some new talent there, including Trent Brown and the big contract he was brought in on, and Incognito, and the development of Colton Miller. There was a lot of optimism that the offensive line was going to take a big step forward, but right now they just can't keep a guard on the field.
Adam, looking at a tweet from Gary McDonald from the Bay Area News Group, says, the word I'm getting on Gabe Jackson's leg injury, quote, it doesn't look good, end quote. You talk about the progress that this Oakland Raiders offensive line is hoping to make, and so much of it comes down to continuity and being able to work together. And now it seems like if you throw this Gabe Jackson injury into the mix, you're looking at the first 2 weeks of the season not having either of your starting guards and really being in a position where you're going to be reworking things all year long.
Yeah, and I think, that's what they're kind of looking at right now because, as we mentioned, Denzel Good would have been the logical guy to slot into one of those guard spots, and he's not there now, and they don't really know how long it's going to be till he's back. It certainly seems like it's going to be into the regular season before he's back. So now they're starting to scramble. They're starting to tap into some of the depth, trying to figure out who might be able to slot into one of those spots. But really what it's going to come down to is I think at some point you're going to have to start looking outside and seeing what's out there, especially as you get closer to the season. If you get some guys cut, you try to make a trade, do something. You got to bring somebody in because, Incognito gets back in week 3, but, man, that feels like a long way away when you're starting the season with two pretty tough divisional games at home. You don't really have time to waste. You got guys like Von Miller out there and the Chiefs and their pass rush on the horizon for those first 2 weeks. You got to get this thing figured out, and you need somebody on the interior. Now, the positive side is Rodney Hudson is in between there at center. I mean, that is just a guy that not a whole lot of people know his name necessarily, but he's just as steady as it gets at center. So that's good. And, I do believe Colton Miller is going to take a massive step forward this year. I think a lot of the injury problems and everything that he had, people didn't really understand the full extent of how hurt he was last year after, he started the year very well, no sacks in the first 3 games, and then he fell apart, and people were like, what happened? Well, what happened is he went through a bunch of injuries. So I really look for him to make a big step at left tackle. But, and, as I said, Trent Brown coming in at right tackle. So you've got those 3 spots where you're like, man, this is exciting. But, oh, no, what are you going to do in those 2 guard spots? And I don't know that the answer is on the roster right now.
Talking to our buddy Adam Hill up at Raiders training camp in Napa. Raiders spent the last 2 days practicing against the L.A. Rams. Of course, Jared Goff at quarterback for the Rams and Derek Carr at quarterback for the Raiders, at least for this year. So, we start talking about offensive line. It's not the sexiest position on the field, but we're talking about this being the make or break season for Derek Carr, and now we're talking about serious offensive line problems for the Raiders. I mean, how is Derek Carr going to deal with this, Adam?
Well, I mean, I think that's a fair question. I was actually making the same case you were about the make or break season for Derek Carr to some long time people that have been around the team and that know the team far better than I do here on my first year on the beat. And I was saying, like, hey, I can't see Gruden, marrying himself to Carr long term, especially with the move next year on the horizon, if he doesn't have, a much, much better season this year, if he doesn't establish himself as that clear-cut franchise guy. And they kind of looked at me and said, yeah, you're wrong. He is the guy. He's going to be Gruden's guy. Like, they're going to have a long-term relationship, and he's going to be the quarterback of the franchise regardless of what happens this year. And I was a little bit surprised by that. But, yeah, I do look at this as a massive season. You know, you mentioned all of the things. I mean, they're coming off a bad year. Gruden, you know, went through it last year, and I think, you know, internally, I think Gruden expected last year to be last year. I don't think he expected any, you know, massive success. And this year would be a year you look to take a step forward to set yourself up in a good position to go to Vegas. But I think, you know, our analysis that it's make or break for Carr may not be entirely accurate, that, you know, they might be committed to him long-term regardless of what happens and everything else. But certainly if things fell off a cliff, that could change. And this could be a season that Carr has to prove it to Gruden, and Gruden has to, you know, marry himself. I think it'd be easy after the year, if they didn't have a great year, for Gruden to say, hey, listen, it's Carr. I'm going to find my own guy. He was kind of here. I inherited him, and move on. But I think they're going to be together. But we're talking about the offensive line. Let's not forget, there's no Antonio Brown out there, and that is the ultimate safety blanket for any quarterback, to have a guy like Antonio Brown out there, and he's not out there yet, too. So a lot of things kind of looking optimistic going into camp, maybe, and the offense looked like it could really take a huge step forward, and all of a sudden now you're looking at it and saying, all right, now there's a couple question marks here. How are they going to figure this out?
Who was involved in the fights today between the Rams and the Raiders?
Well, Aaron Donald was right in the middle of the first one, and actually with Gabe Jackson. So Gabe Jackson, a very eventful day in the middle of that fracas. You know, the first one that broke out, it was kind of in a pass rush drill over on the other side of the field. And it was funny because myself and a lot of other reporters were on fight watch on the other field. So there's two fields at the facility. It's the Raiders offense against Rams defense on one field, and Raiders defense against Rams offense on the other. And we were all expecting the Raiders defense to start a fight with the Rams offense with Jonathan Abram over there. So all eyes were on that field, and Abram was not disappointing. He was certainly playing physical at the end of certain plays. But then all of a sudden on the other field, you see this fight break out. It's as I said, Gabe Jackson, Aaron Donald in the middle of it. That dies down, and then a couple of reps later, we see it really break out. There's really a whole bunch of players. There's kind of a mass of humanity. It was tough to see, but Tyler Romer was in the middle of it, a San Diego State guy who, you know, has kind of turned some heads here in camp. He's certainly got a mean streak. That's the reputation. And, you know, he had his helmet off. Not sure if he took it off. It looked more like the Rams ripped it off. But as I said, it was on the other field, so heard a lot of people talking about it. Didn't actually get to see it up close until all the people were circled around. But my observation from it was the Sean McVay sprint from the offensive field all the way over to the defensive field to try to get involved and break things up. And then he stayed over there. So he usually is with the Rams offense. He decided to stay over on the Rams defensive field just to kind of keep his eye on things the rest of the day. And nothing really broke out the rest of the way.
Were you around McVay yesterday after practice number 1 when he spoke to the media?
I was. Come on, Steve. Is there a field with McVay on it that I'm on that I'm not immediately going over to him?
We never got to our love affair with the boy genius because we got cut off yesterday at the end of the spot. Well, I wanted to ask you, I saw comments from McVay talking about Josh Jacobs. You were there for that. I mean, he was talking about Jacobs in pretty glowing terms, right?
Yeah, certainly. He had very high praise for him. And, you know, sometimes it's tough to really evaluate when a coach is talking about another team. You know, I actually asked McVay today about his assessment of the Raiders defense, and you would have thought he was talking about the 85 Bears, the way he was talking about the horrific Raiders defense. So, you know, I don't think you would trash him, but yeah, certainly he had high praise for Jacobs. And then today it was John Gruden's turn to really sing the praises of Josh Jacobs and how he was able to play today out on the field. But I will point out one thing. I know there's a lot of fantasy interest, and I did another interview yesterday where I was mentioning this, but Jacobs seems to be coming out of the game quite a bit in goal line situations. So I'm sure there are fantasy people out there that are freaking out about that if they're starting to hear that for the first time. But they have used Doug Martin quite a bit in those goal line situations. But we did see one play in goal line yesterday where Jacobs went over the top, had a really nice dive into the end zone. So I don't think it's exclusively Martin's job at the goal line, but I don't know that they're going to use Josh Jacobs as much in that area as people hope.
There was also a little trash talk. I know yesterday, I think it was between Woods and Gareon Conley, which I guess is good for Conley that he's confident. It'd be nice if he could play to that level. But just reading a quote from Paul Gutierrez of ESPN, I guess McVay was involved in that as well, the trash talk, and he said, you don't know that route. He'll dice your ass. Like, okay, let's do this.
Yeah, good. I mean, I guess as you said, Gareon Conley, a very kind of a soft-spoken guy. Not a whole lot of, I don't know if it's lack of confidence as it could be, and not really, being confident in himself to play at that level and to talk at that level. But I think he showed a lot of improvement last year, and maybe that's a good sign if he start to get involved in some of those things and, really flex his muscle a little bit and start to feel himself. I think can't be a bad thing for a cornerback. I know, it's not always the best thing for everyone, but I think cornerbacks have to have a little bit of that in them if they want to be successful. And listen, I think Gareon Conley showed some signs last year. They believe he can be a lockdown number one type corner, but he hasn't shown that consistently yet. And I think they hope he takes that next step. But actually, today it was the backup corners that Gruden was talking about. He loves his rookie cornerback, so he just grouped them all into a big group and said, "Man, we have really upgraded some of the talent level in our corners. They've got size, they've got speed, and I'm really liking everything they're doing out there."
Let's talk defensive line. First of all, how is PJ Hall? Because I know he was getting a little dinged up, and then there's at least a couple other guys sitting out right now, right? Still Eddie Vanderdoes not playing?
Yeah, and Vanderdoes is in a tough spot because he's a guy that came into the league, had injury issues, worked himself all the way back last year. Training camp, got hurt again, had a big setback, and then this year was looking to really establish himself, and then suffered a concussion early in camp and hasn't really been able to get out there again. So he's in a really, really tough spot to try to make the team at this point, and just has not been able to stay on the field. So that's certainly a big setback. And PJ Hall, as you mentioned, went down the other day, looked like a back, tried to come back in to a session, and then had to walk off the field with the trainer. So he's doing everything he can to try to get those reps in, but he's having a tough time too. So they're a little bit thin there. They're certainly thin at tight end, and now with the guard issue, they're pretty thin at guard as well. So they were almost back to full strength like 2 days ago, and now they're starting to drop off again. And that's kind of what happens in training camp sometimes. But the defensive line is interesting to watch. I know, there is a lot of optimism that they can be a lot better. They have to be a lot better. And, so much talk about trying to get to the quarterback and get sacks, but they've got to stop the run first. I mean, if you don't stop the run, you don't really get in a position to rush the passer. And, they didn't really go out and draft, dominant rush ends that get to the quarterback on a consistent level. That's not what they did. I mean, Cleveland Ferrell is not that guy. He's more of a three-down guy, more of an all-around player, can stop the run and can get to the quarterback at times, but isn't really that double-digit projection as far as sacks goes. But what they do hope is that they've got a guy like Ferrell who can hold his position. They've got Josh Morrow on the other side, who's a run-stopper veteran, can really, hold himself. He sets the edge really well. So those aren't the dominant pass rushers, but they hope that their defensive line could be steady, stop the run, and then you could put Arden Key in more of a situation of just being a pass rusher, and that could help him get to the quarterback a little more if he only has to play 15, 20 snaps a game in pass rush situations. So that's kind of the hope there. But yeah, some of the interior defensive linemen have to get on the field. I will say Cleveland Ferrell took a couple of reps at defensive tackle today, which I thought was very interesting. Didn't get to hear John Gruden address that. I was kind of bouncing around a little bit, so I don't know if he talked about it, but certainly that was something to monitor if they're trying to get, a couple other athletic type of defensive players on the field and get them on the line and kind of build their defensive line that way.